As the Irish agri-food sector accelerates its efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, just what are the practical steps farmers need to take to reduce their carbon footprint? This morning I'll be joined in studio by Teagasc Research Officer Dr Deirdre Hennessey and Dr Seamus Kearney, Signpost Specialist, to discuss reducing emissions from chemical nitrogen. We'll be going live into a Signpost dairy farm in Golden, County Tipperary to hear what's happening on the ground. And later in the programme, we'll hear from Dr Siobhan Kavanagh, Signpost Specialist, on what's happening next week as part of Sustainability Week 2022. Hello and welcome to this morning's Signpost webinar, coming to you live from the Teagasc studio in Carlow. My name is Mark Gibson, and over the next hour we'll be discussing how farmers can reduce their greenhouse gas emissions from chemical nitrogen. But before we go any further, I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce my studio panel, Dr Deirdre Hennessey, Senior Research Officer in Teagasc Moore Park, specialising in grassland and clover incorporation. And we're also joined by Dr Seamus Kearney, who is a training and development specialist with the Teagasc Signpost Programme. Deirdre and Seamus, thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you very much, Mark.
So to get us started, Seamus is going to tell us about some practical steps farmers can take to reduce their nitrogen use and at the same time reduce their emissions. Please send us your questions using the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen, and we'll put these to our panel throughout the show. Today's show is being recorded and will be available on the Teagasc website in the coming days. We'll now hand over to Seamus for his presentation.
Good morning and welcome. This morning I want to look at where Irish agricultural emissions come from, why nitrous oxide emissions are so important in the context of Irish agriculture, and more importantly, thirdly, how can we as an industry reduce our nitrous oxide emissions? So we're going to start first of all by looking at the Irish agricultural emissions and where they come from. And you can see from the pie chart there, the blue part of the chart, about 57.5% of our emissions come from thermic fermentation. About 10% from how we store and how we spread our manure. So some of that is nitrous oxide, some of it is methane. The green part is how we use our fertilisers and when we use them, and also some emissions from soils. So that's our nitrous oxide part. And there's about another 5% there made up between lime and fuel usage and urea application as well. So really when we look at it overall in the context, we're looking at about 65 or 2/3 of our emissions are coming from methane, but the reason we're looking at nitrous oxide this morning is 30% of our overall emissions are coming from nitrous oxide. And I suppose the other thing to bear in mind with nitrous oxide, it is it's the most potent of all the agricultural greenhouse gases, 268 times more potent than carbon dioxide. So 30% of our emissions coming from nitrous oxide. And that's why we need to try and reduce our nitrous oxide emissions to hence reduce our greenhouse gas emissions from Irish agriculture. And how do we go about reducing our greenhouse gas emissions and our nitrous oxide emissions? I suppose first of all this morning I want to look at 5 different pathways. So number 1, we need to look at liming. Number 2, we need to look at improving our P&K, hence that we can reduce the amount of chemical nitrogen we're using. We need to retain more of the nitrogen in our slurries. We need to grow our own nitrogen in clover. And whatever nitrogen we use after that, we need to change to a more environmentally form of fertiliser in the form of protected urea. So first of all, we need to look at liming here. And if we look at liming, some work from our colleagues in Johnstown Castle, where they took an example of soil at 5.5 pH. And by spreading 5 tonne of lime per hectare on that soil, they managed to lift the P levels on that soil by over 5 parts per million, 2 indexes in total. But as well as that, by getting naturally occurring phosphorus out of the ground, there was also the added benefit that that soil also released naturally occurring nitrogen up to 80 kilos of nitrogen per hectare per year. So the big message here is by getting the lime and the pH right, first of all, we're releasing more naturally occurring phosphorus and more importantly nitrogen from the ground, hence we can cut back on our chemical nitrogen applications. Secondly, by building P&K levels, it helps to get more use of the nitrogen we sprayed on our farms. So if we look at it here, first of all, looking at the graph, I suppose the first point is if we have very low H, P and K, we're getting very low utilisation out of our nitrogen. If we move to the next point, by getting the lime right, we're getting better utilisation. By improving the lime and the P levels, we're improving our utilisation better. By improving the P and K, we're improving it further again. And really the optimum is getting the lime P and K. So that's lime over 6.2 for grassland, 6.5 for clover, and into index 3s and 4s for P and K, especially index 3 for productive farms. And by doing that, we're improving the amount of nitrogen that we can retain from the nitrogen we sprayed, and hence reduce the overall amount of chemical nitrogen we need to spray on our farms. Thirdly, we need to retain more of the nitrogen from our slurry, again to cut back on the amount of chemical nitrogen we're using at farm level. So if we look at it here, first of all, we have a splash plate, and this is kind of common over a decade ago on all farms. All slurry was spread by splash plate. And by spreading with a splash plate in the summer, we're only retaining about 3 units of nitrogen per 1,000 gallons, because we're losing a lot of it to volatilization and to the sun actually reducing the amount of utilization we're getting from our slurries. So by moving the splash plate to the springtime, we're doubling the amount of nitrogen we're retaining in our slurry. But really, the ultimate and the gold standard is to move our slurries from a splash plate in the summer to moving it in the spring, and ultimately trying to get our slurries sprayed by low emission slurry spreading. And by doing that, we're tripling the recovery of the nitrogen in that slurry. So by tripling the nitrogen we recover in the slurry, we're able to cut down on our chemical nitrogen that we use. Fourthly, we need to grow our own nitrogen, and by doing this, by getting our clover right on farms, so by getting the lime, P and K right, we can incorporate clover into our farms. And this is just some work showing the amount of clover in swards. This was work done by colleagues in Teagasc Moor Park, where they were spreading 150 kilos nitrogen per hectare per year. And you can see starting off at the start of the year that the clover levels are low. Once we hit April and weather starts warming up, the clover starts to take off and replace chemical nitrogen on these farms. And by getting the clover right on farms, we can replace up to 100 to 120 kilos of nitrogen per hectare per year, again cutting down on the amount of chemical nitrogen we're using. But it's important that the clover ground is grazed tight in its first year to leave sun down to the base of the plant, and also that we need to get more than 20% clover to really get the nitrogen benefits from these clover swards. The fifth way we can try and reduce our nitrous oxide emissions is by moving our fertiliser to more environmentally friendly fertilisers. And if we look at it here from the graph, CAN is the most nitrous oxide of all our fertilisers. And if we compare it versus urea or protected urea, which are 70% lower in the amount of nitrous oxide emissions that they give off compared to CAN. So I suppose really we need to move away from urea as well, because there's ammonia in urea. We have a national ceiling for ammonia, which we've been in breach of for the last while. So really the big message here is we need to replace urea with protected urea to reduce ammonia, and we need to replace our CAN with protected urea to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. And if we look at CAN and protected urea, every 5 tonne of CAN is the same as 3 tonne of protected urea. So the same amount of nitrogen, physical nitrogen in each of the scenarios, but by moving from CAN to protected urea, so from 5 tonne of CAN to 3 tonne of protected urea, at current prices we can save farmers €1,000 for every 5 tonne of CAN and move to 3 tonne of protected urea. And by moving every 5 tonne of CAN to 3 tonne of protected urea, we can save the equivalent of emissions of almost a dairy cow, 0.9 of a dairy cow, or 1.5 suckler cows. So really our summary from this morning, what we're trying to say is we need to reduce our chemical nitrogen first of all by getting our soil pH right, by getting our P and K levels right, by recovering more nitrogen in our slurry, by spreading it in the spring with low emissions, by growing our own nitrogen through clover. And any further nitrogen we use after that, we need to start moving from CAN to protected urea type products. And really when we look at it here, reducing our chemical nitrogen by 25% can give a reduction of greenhouse gas emissions on intensively stocked farms by in the region of 4 or 5% in greenhouse gas emissions. Where if we move from 100% CAN to 100% protected urea, we can deliver reductions of between 7 and 8% in greenhouse gas emission reduction at farm level. So thank you very much for your attention, and we'll now take any questions in the Q&A.
And thanks, Seamus, for that presentation. A really compelling case for that shift from urea to protected urea. Just a reminder to use the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen if you'd like to ask us any questions. And the session is being recorded. So, Seamus, thanks for joining us back here on the panel.
Thank you very much, Mark.
And Seamus, just to start out, I mean, what in your view, has the greatest effect in reducing greenhouse gases emissions on farms? Is it changing from CAN to protected urea, or reducing fertiliser use by 20% on farms?
Yeah, excellent question, Mark. And look, I suppose the big one is to reduce our emissions. We haven't any big silver bullet, but I suppose protected urea is the closest thing we have, as I'd say, to a bronze bullet. The biggest technology we have to reduce emissions. So really, Mark, I suppose the big shift you want to make first of all is to move from CAN to protected urea, and also from urea to protected urea to reduce our ammonia. But by moving from CAN to protected urea, you're really bringing your nitrous oxide emissions down down to about a quarter of what they would be. So that is definitely a starting point. After that, Denmark, we work on trying to reduce the overall amount of nitrogen we use at farm level.
And you mentioned in your presentation, lime, phosphorus, potash, and clover as ways of reducing the chemical nitrogen. Could you place these in items in order of importance? Yeah,
I suppose the first building block, Mark, is lime. Okay, and if we look at grassland soils in Ireland, about 50% of the productive soils in Ireland now are low in lime. So that's the first thing, first of all, to release the nitrogen and the phosphorus as we're talking. Then the second part after that is to get the P and the K levels right. By getting those right, we get better use of our nitrogen, and we can cut down our chemical nitrogen use. And really then when all those are in place, you can start putting in your clover in at that stage, because clover needs over 6.5 pH. It needs index 3 for P, index 3 for K. So then the clover comes in as the third part of that step, and that's when you start fixing nitrogen, or really start growing your own nitrogen to reduce your overall chemical nitrogen.
Deirdre, if I could turn to you, the government has set fairly ambitious targets to reduce the amount of chemical nitrogen being used by farmers. What can farmers do now to prepare for this low nitrogen future?
Yeah, so, they can start to put in place the things that Seamus has mentioned, again, reiterating lime, P and K, getting that right, but then start working on getting that clover in and using good grassland management, measuring grass that's on their farm, using information like predicted grass growth, putting all that suite of information together, then they can make real decisions around reducing chemical fertiliser. So if you know what you're growing, you know what you need to feed your cows, then you can make the decision if there's an opportunity to reduce chemical fertiliser use. So clover will automatically give you a really good opportunity through fixation. But if you're managing your grass and you know your demand, your feed supply and so on, even in a grass only system or part of the farm, you can make that decision about reducing chemical fertiliser use. And there's big opportunities in the summer. So, if you think about it, Mark, every little helps. So every little bit that's caught at every rotation, that all sums up at the end of the year.
And is clover a solution for every farm soil type?
Probably not, realistically, Mark. So as Seamus said, it likes a good soil pH over 6.5. Some of our soils, that you won't get to that, particularly our more peaty soils. Clover doesn't like its feet being wet, if you want to put it that way. It doesn't like sitting in very wet soils. So it will struggle in some of those soils. But, there's most of our soil types will be able to have some level of clover. And look, we can break our farms down. Soil type in most farms is not identical in every single paddock. So there are probably areas of the farm that it can be incorporated in. And I suppose that's really the farmer, him or herself, knows what part of their farm that they can put clover in, or the part of their farm that it's more likely to work well in. So, there's lots of information out there, but also the farmer needs their own information around their soil type, their fertility status, the type of sward they have on their farms, and indeed their demand for nitrogen on their farms, because obviously lower stocking rates, you've less demand for grass, so, maybe there's less of a role in some of those scenarios. Having said that, on very low stocking rate farms where you don't need a lot of nitrogen going out, adding clover into the sward, just managing the grass a little bit increases the feed quality. So for example, it can increase your growth rate or your live weight gain, for example. So there's big roles for clover going forward.
Seamus, Deirdre mentioned soil fertility. What can farmers be doing now to start preparing for having good soil fertility for clover, and indeed having even some of the multi-species swards in place?
Yeah, I suppose the first point, Mark, is soil samples. Take soil samples, number one, and have the soil samples. Number two, take the soil samples out of the drawer, make them live, even mark the paddocks that are good or bad for is lime, P or K, so at least you know what you need to build up on those paddocks then at that stage. So soil samples first of all, getting the P and K right, having a fertiliser plan, a nutrient management plan, so you know where you need to target the nutrients. And you'll see that in a minute with Edwin, like his farm is way ahead of the national average with lime, P and K. And that's one of the big foundations that Edwin has on his farm in order to reduce his chemical nitrogen, but also to improve the clover that he's growing on the farm then as well at the same time.
Just finally, in relation to slurry, there is great nitrogen value in slurry, we know that. So which is more important? Is it spreading slurry in the springtime or using the low emission slurry spreading techniques?
Yeah, well, I suppose we've gone from 0 to about 36% of our slurry now spreading low emission at this stage. So not everyone is spreading with low emission, so the first step is to get the slurry out early in the year. So ideally March, April, just before the 1st of May. That way you're retaining more nitrogen. Then if you can make the next step and putting out with low emission, you're going that really the gold standard of spreading slurry at that stage. And like basically 2,500 gallons of slurry in the spring with a low emission is replacing about 25 units of nitrogen. That's really your application for the first round. So definitely moving to the spring first of all, then getting it out with low emissions where at all possible.
Okay, great. Well, we're going to come back to those questions and more, and do keep your questions coming into us. We see lots coming through. But next we're going to go live to the farm of Edwin Thompson in Golden, County Tipperary. But before we do that, we had the opportunity to catch up with Edwin a few weeks ago.
My name is Edwin Thompson. I'm farming here in Golden, County Tipperary. I'm currently milking 158 cows on a milking platform of 140 acres. We also rear the heifers here on the farm. It's a family-run farm, so I'm farming here with my parents, and we've one labour unit employed full-time as well. I'm married to my wife Diane. We have 3 kids who are also interested in farming, and they give a hand when they can. We were always interested in the environment on this farm. As you can see in the background, there's lots of trees, lots of hedges. When this opportunity came up to join the Signpost programme, I felt it was a good fit for me and a good fit for this farm. I'm keen on the clover, and I like the sustainability aspect where farming can survive on its own without depending on too much use of chemicals. The first thing we did was we made a conscious effort to purchase protected urea. With the use of the protected urea, I don't see any obvious reduction in grass growth. So I'm very happy that the parts of the farm that require the nitrogen, it's working very well. Also, we've invested in a slurry spreading system called, with a dribble bar, which is LESS, which is the less slurry spreading, which is very beneficial to the farming system here and to the dairy farming, because we can spread our slurry and we can graze it again quite quickly. We've currently reseeded 35 acres of the grazing platform here. On these clover paddocks, these got no nitrogen since the middle of May. But at the same time, we are watching the P's and the K's, so it got a half a bag of 0730 during the summer. It also gets dairy washings, and the lime is correct. The benefits are massive. Not only do I have cash in my pocket, but these paddocks, we don't have to spread them every time the cows graze them. So I'm saving on labour, I'm helping the environment, and I'm growing the grass.
Now we now join Shane O'Hanlon, Teagasc Signpost Advisor, and Edwin Thompson, who's dairy farmer in Golden, County Tipperary. Good morning, Shane and Edwin. How are you today?
Good morning, Mark.
Good morning, Mark.
Yes, Mark. So I'm joined here with Edwin Thompson, a dairy signpost farmer in Golden, County Tipperary. And behind us you can see Edwin's cows are actually grazing a reseeded paddock with grass and clover that was reseeded this year. So I suppose just to start off, Edwin, in your experience, what are 2 easy wins that farmers can adapt to reduce emissions on their farm?
Well, Shane, the first and obvious one is the protected urea. We made a conscious effort on this farm the last couple of years to spread only protected urea, and it's working very well, like I said on the video before. So protected urea saving me a little bit of money, and it's saving the environment as well. With the protected urea, then we changed to 18612s, which gives us a bit more control of the P's and K's that we spread throughout the year, and it's also the 18612 fertilizer is also quite beneficial to the environment in comparison to the old pasture sward or the cut sward. So that's the first thing we did, Shane.
And I suppose in relation to protected urea, Edwin, you made the conscious decision just to try it yourself. So you obviously tried with a small amount, gained the confidence to progress that, and obviously you bought more and have been getting on very well with it since.
Yeah, I think in 2020 I bought a couple of tons of it and tried it, and I saw it worked very well. In 2021, I think it was nearly all protected urea. I can't quite remember now, but it worked very well again. And again this year, 2022, it's been all protected urea. But that goes with the P's with the 18612. You know, so the protected urea is just the nitrogen end of it. The P's and K's, then we're using the 18612.
And is there any other practice, Edwin?
Well, the dribble bar, of course, on the vacuum tanker has I see huge benefits to the amount of grass grown compared to the old splash plate where we're plastering the grass in slurry. The dribble bar just puts the slurry out in a nice little line, and in a nice line, and it's much nicer for the cows then to come along, and a couple of weeks later they can graze it. There's no tainting of the grass, and the grass has access to light and can grow much more effectively. So the dribble bar is a big help as well.
And we just saw in your introductory video there, Edwin, that you've a lot of clover on this farm, and I suppose that has allowed you to reduce your nitrogen substantially, hasn't it?
Yeah. 2 years ago I reseeded 18 acres, and I did another 18 acres this year. So there's about 35 acres reseeded now to date. And in those reseeds, we targeted the timing of the reseed was in the springtime to allow the clover to grow. So we made sure that we had clover in the reseed, and so those paddocks get no nitrogen, no chemical nitrogen spread on them from May onwards. So.
But it's important to say that you maintain a constant P and K levels in
Yes,
those paddocks.
yeah, absolutely. They regularly get dairy washings. They also got a top up of 0730 during the summer. They got slurry in the springtime, and in fact, one of them got a little bit of extra lime this year because it had the soil results showed it was a little bit low, so I gave it another bit of lime this year again, even after the reseed last year. So it's these paddocks are well looked after. The P's are good, the K's are good, the lime is correct, and the clover is supplying the nitrogen.
So I suppose just to put that into context, Mark, from Edwin switching from traditional fertilisers such as cotton pasture sward to protected urea, that has saved his total fertiliser bill at current prices by €6,000. And to put that into context, is worth €40 a cow to him, as well as decreasing his overall emissions on the farm by 4%. And I suppose on top of that, Edwin mentioned he reduced nitrogen substantially due to clover on the farm. So he has reduced his nitrogen by 38%, which again equates to about €7,000 in a saving. To put that back into context in cow terms, that's worth €50 a cow. So those two actions, as well as an extra percent to decrease his overall emissions on his farm. So it has a massive saving financially, as well as decreasing his emissions over over a year, really, you could say, Edwin, isn't it?
Well, it's a year and a half, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Edwin, if I could ask you, just you're well on the journey to implementing these various sustainability measures on your farm. I mean, is this adding a lot to your workload, or is this integrating with your existing system?
No, Mark, it integrates very easily with the existing system. There's no massive investment to buying protected urea. All you have to do is ring up the co-op and order it. It spreads the same as your traditional fertilizer. So in that sense, it's no problem. And then there's a little bit less spreading involved. With the clover, we don't need to spread as often. So I'm sort of noticing now this year particularly that we used to always go out once a week with the fertilizer spreader and top up the paddocks that had been grazed in the previous few days, but probably only go out now maybe twice every 3 weeks, with the fertilizer spreader, just to those clover paddocks don't need topping up as regularly. So it's very beneficial.
So you're cutting down on your diesel at the same time, which is always good news.
Yeah.
Tell me, Edwin, how important is lime in the system you're operating there?
Well, I've spread a lot of lime over the years, and it's really coming to fruition now. And as the lads have explained, the lime has to be correct for the clover to survive. I suppose that historically here we were in the old rep system. We had to spread a lot of lime, and then I continued spreading that. I do regular soil analysis, so every 3 years, and anything that needs lime gets 2 tonne of lime, and I'll be doing a bit more again now this autumn.
And I suppose just on that, Mark, coupled with the lime, Edwin, there's a major focus on soil fertility on the farm, Edwin. So I suppose you're using low emission, you're getting good value from your slurry. You got your slurry analysed this spring, which is a great way to determine what you have exactly in your tank, and you can, I suppose, have a plan tailored based on what you have. So that's what you do, Edwin, and that's what you will do going forward.
We got the slurry analysed, like you said, Shane, and that gave us great information on where to put the best, our strongest slurry, where to put it, and the more dilute slurry was suitable then on the grazing paddocks, and that kind of thing. Also, we sat down at the start of the year too. We came up with a plan for the fertiliser, which was a great. Shane came along, and my tip crop advisor Andrew O'Neill came along. We sat down in the kitchen. We came up with a plan, and we purchased as much phosphate as we could that my allowance allowed. So we forward bought 18,612 and to maximise our phosphate allowance, and that was used then during the year. And once we had a plan in place, it was very easy to implement it.
Very good. Shane, if I can ask you, I mean, you're working with a number of different signpost farmers in the region. What has been the general response to the programme and the measures that are being rolled out on farms across the region?
Yeah, that's correct, Mark. So currently I'm working with 3 signpost farmers in the Tipperary region. So I suppose it's, as Edwin said, it's getting the basics right, and I suppose at the start of the year, it's drawing up a plan and trying to follow that plan as best you can. So again, I suppose it's the easy wins, as Seamus said. It's in adopting protected urea. It's not a big investment in relation to labour or infrastructure. It's just a case of going to your co-op and putting in that order and starting from there. And I suppose, as Edwin has explained, he started, I suppose, with a small bit and has progressed and has seen nothing but advantages from it. So I suppose that's what we're on the Signpost programme trying to encourage, and supporting farmers and trying to adopt those new practices.
Excellent. And maybe if we could ask Edwin, I mean, since you joined the programme, the measures you've implemented, are you seeing immediate effects, be it on the sward or your pocket?
Yeah, for me, Mark, the big thing was to get the clover up going. So we did a lot of reseeding, like we've said, and once you get your reseed established and graze it regularly, and there's no more nitrogen spread on that particular paddock for the rest of the year. So, you know, and that's a big saving. You know, there's 18 acres last year, 18 acres again this year, so you have 30 odd acres there, with no chemical nitrogen since May. So, you know, it's very beneficial.
Great. Okay. Thanks, Edwin and Shane. We're going to just broaden the discussion here to include our panel here in studio as well, and we have some questions coming in as well for you, Edwin and Shane. But Deirdre, if I could turn to you, there's a question coming in relation to the bloat issue that can sometimes be associated with clover establishment. Are there any concerns that we should have around that?
Yeah, Mark, so like bloat is a concern in clover systems. I suppose it's probably a bigger concern, you know, in the scenario that Edwin is in, where he's you know, converting the farm, we'll call it, to a clover system. So, you know, he's moving between clover and no clover paddocks, and I suppose a bit more of an increased risk there. So I suppose firstly the thing about bloat is what is bloat? So it's a build up of froth basically in the rumen, and a build-up that traps the gases that the cow is normally belching out, and that causes the bloat. But you know, there's lots of things we can do that are relatively straightforward in terms of minimising the risk of bloat. So, you know, things like watching post-grazing sward heights. That means, you know, your cows aren't being underfed, they're not going to be hungry going into a clover paddock, they're not going to gorge on the clover. So clover, cows do show a preference when they go into the paddock to graze the clover first. It's very low dry matter, there isn't a lot of fibre in it, and that's what results in that froth building up in the rumen. keep some fibre into the cow, so it could be a bit of concentrate. If you're in kind of a perfect storm situation where you have like wetter or low dry matter material that the cows are eating. So at the moment, dry matters are fairly low in pastures. We've had a good bit of rain, but swards are quite lush still, so dry matter is relatively low. So the things you need to do in that kind of scenario is make sure the cows are not underfed or not hungry going into the paddock. So don't be grazing too tight, as in don't be going below 4 centimetres. If you are, that means the cows haven't enough in their rumen basically going into the new break. You can give them a smaller break for a couple of hours, put up a strip wire, and after 2 or 3 hours move that. But by doing that, you're forcing them to eat the grass as well as the clover, so they're getting some fibre into the rumen. This time of the year, there's probably a bit of concentrate going in as well. Make sure that's available. And then, you know, once they have some fibre in the rumen, you can take down that strip wire and they can work away grazing on the paddock for the rest of the day, and they'll be fine. You can use bloat oil as well if there's a fear or a risk of bloat. Put some bloat oil in the water the day before and while they're in the paddock. This is a little bit in the rumen, because having oil in the rumen helps to break down that foam.
And for a farmer, it sounds you need to be informed before you make that decision to increase the amount of clover in your swards. How should farmers go about educating themselves on that?
Yeah, so we actually have some guidelines on the Teagasc website, just a few steps around bloat management. We have a little booklet that we published earlier in the year, and there's a section on that again in bloat management. But talk to your advisor, talk to other farmers who have good experience with clover. And I suppose it's just a little bit about being aware. Yes, bloat is a potential risk, but in a well-managed system, it's not a significant risk. If a farmer's watching his post-grazing sward heights, he's making sure his cows are well fed and that there's some fibre in the diet, it's easy to manage.
So this time of year, Deirdre, when farmers are trying to stretch grass, they'll be probably putting in a bit of silage.
Yeah.
There's probably maybe 3 or 4 kilos of meal going in.
Yeah.
That would be help. What
Big help,
is
Seamus.
put up 2 fences, one what they're going to eat for that 12-hour period, but give them a smaller break for the first couple of hours, just to make them eat the grass with the clover, to try and dilute the amount of clover they can take in at any one time.
Yeah, if you're worried, but if they're eating silage and a bit of concentrate, there's going to be fibre in the rumen.
And would you leave the cows go out at their own pace in the paddock, or leave them out to herd together? Would that matter?
I would say, Seamus, it's better to leave them out together, because if you're leaving them out line by or row by row, the cows that hit the paddock first, they're going to have the choice of what's there, and they're going to have more opportunity to select the clover.
Okay, so
leave them
they're
out
all
as
out at one time.
Yeah.
There's a question, Edwin, in from our audience there in relation to spreading of slurry, and what in your context there in Tipperary does early spreading of slurry. What timing of the year would you be getting out with your slurry?
Well, I think I'm allowed to spread it from about the 15th of January, but I try to hold it as long as I can. In 2022, this past spring gone, it was about the middle of February, the 15th of February, I think, around about then. I got in my local contractor, and we had a few paddocks grazed. And he came in with the umbilical system, and we spread a few paddocks that had been grazed, and he spread a few paddocks that had low covers on them. And then I got him back again about a month after that, in about the middle of Patrick's Day. I can't quite remember, but we spread some again with the umbilical, and he put out about 100,000 gallons each time, which was a great labour-saving tool for me. But it is, and he was using the dribble bar on his umbilical, so it worked very well.
So, Edwin, would it be fair to say you kind of look at it as a resource that you want to manage and get the best value you can get out of it, that you have enough slurry storage?
Oh, definitely, Seamus. The cost of fertiliser now, slurry is a very, very valuable resource on the farm. And we look at our soil analysis, and we target paddocks that need it the most. And we try and put the most suitable slurry on those paddocks, if possible,
Okay, and silage ground as well, obviously.
My silage ground is down the road, so it was more difficult to get it out there on the springtime, but we put slurry on the silage ground after the second cut this year, so to try just boost the P and K levels on that land, which is probably my lowest P and K, like all silage ground is my lowest P and K levels, but it got 2,500 gallons of slurry there in August, early August, after the second cut silage was taken.
And getting P&K fertilisers then as well.
It got 4.5 bags of 18-612 in the first cut, which supplied about 80 units of nitrogen, and then whatever for the P&K, and I think it got about 3.5 bags for the second cut.
Very good.
18-612, yeah.
We have a question in from our audience. I think Deirdre is probably one for you. Just it's in relation to red clover and more red clover than white clover in the diet. Will that increase the fibre in the diet overall?
Yeah, so red clover is a bit more fibrous, just simply by the way it grows and its growth structure. It has more of a stem than white clover. But the problem with red clover from a grazing point of view is it's not very persistent. The growing point is higher in the sward and it's more likely to be grazed by the plant, so it won't persist as long as white clover in the sward. But yes, it would have a higher fibre content.
So more silage orientated, Deirdre?
Absolutely, Seamus, yeah. And you know, look, we just need to look at our organic colleagues, our organic farmers. You know, they use that as their main protein source for their winter feed. So it is very good feed.
Getting up to 3 crops of silage off it during the year.
Yeah. I wonder, is there any experience, Shane? Is there any experience of red clover being sown in your region?
There is, Mark, but I suppose a lot of farmers are like Edwin. They're trying to get their soil fertility right and trying to manage, we'll say, white clover in the swards, but definitely red clover has become more popular. And I know Edwin, just from talking to him, he's maybe going to try it next year in an out block, as Deirdre said, a kind of a silage block, just to see how that goes. So yeah, I know there has been good uptake, now in fairness.
Yeah, just maybe a question to Edwin there. Edwin, lime, do you have a specific time of year, or is it all year round, or when do you spread lime?
No, whenever it suits, Seamus. It can be difficult to get an opportunity. So I did a bit in the springtime. It just happened to get a paddock grazed and it suited, so I got a bit done in the springtime. And I have a bit in mind now to do this autumn, but hopefully it won't get too wet. It needs to be done in the next couple of weeks. No, so timing of the year wouldn't matter, Seamus. If it suits, I'll try and do it. Yeah.
Okay, so you know specific time. I suppose the one thing there, Mark, like credit the farmers, like we hit a 40-year high in lime last year, 1.35 million tonnes. So, and it looks like we could even probably go higher again this year. The government are bringing in a subsidy. In the budget there's 8 or 9 million there for lime as well. So really, it's the starting block for any foundation, out there for any farm. Very much so. Yeah.
Absolutely. So that soil fertility is so important as your foundation for getting good crops. With some questions in relation to multi-species swards, Deirdre. But one in particular around, are there any species that could be incorporated or accompanying the clover to reduce the risk of bloat in cows? Is that something that has been looked at or are you aware of?
We haven't really done any work on that, Mark, but in multi-species swards, because you have a mix, we'll have more fibre in the sward, so it's likely that your risk of bloat is going to be reduced. So something like plantain or chicory, which have they're very digestible, they're likely to help reduce. And of course, if you have those in the sward, you probably have slightly less clover because plant space competition and so on. Now the issue with some of the herbs is persistence. From our experiences, plantain looks like it's relatively persistent. We only have a few years' work done on that yet. Chicory, less so. Probably the trampling and so on from the cows make it less persistent. Seems to do okay under cutting type scenarios, which would be, a lot of the knowledge around multi-species swards is coming, say, from Europe and so on, but a lot of the work's been done under cutting rather than grazing, so Teagasc are doing a lot of work now with grazing herbs. But there are other benefits to having herbs in the sward, or for having multi-species swards around perhaps growth during drought periods. There's some evidence from New Zealand that plantain may help with reducing nitrate leaching and capturing nitrogen over the winter because it's more active in terms of growth over the winter. So look, there's lots of interesting and potentially beneficial benefits of multi-species, but I suppose we need to know a little bit more about how they persist in particular in our grazing systems.
Just a question for you, Seamus, there coming in around compound fertilisers. It's great to see such reductions in application. If emissions reductions need to increase more over the next 10 years, will it be necessary and possible to stop chemical nitrogen application altogether? I mean, is that something that we foresee?
Yeah, look, I suppose Deirdre mentioned some of our colleagues in organics that they do get away without chemical nitrogen, but I suppose it's all about matching what you can grow on your farm to the kind of demand that you have then as well, Mark. So it's back to stocking rate. And I suppose that's the other thing, technology as well, like farmers. I suppose we have a target of cutting back 20%, Mark, by 2030. And it looks like up to the end of June this year, the first 3 quarters of the fertiliser year, which starts in October, the nitrogen use or nitrogen sold in Ireland was back 19%. Right. Now, so we're pretty much where we need to be, but the worrying thing is we're back 30% in P and K. And like for some farmers that are low in soil fertility, maybe a bag of oats of 18612 might give them the same amount of grass grown as a bag of cut or pasture sward, because you're getting now more P and K automatically by going with the bag. And so that's the thing what Edwin is doing with the 18612. He's concentrating the P and K into a shorter amount of spreading periods, and he's opening up more opportunity. That's the other big one as well, to go straight nitrogen in the form of protected urea. So he's going to lower emitting 18612 as a compound, as he said, lower than cut and pasture sward, and he's going for the lower emitting the protected urea then as well, versus CAN. And like what he's doing there is saving them €90 a cow. Like for the average farmer, that's 9,000 or 10,000 euro in a year for very little extra kind of work we're talking about.
Excellent. Okay, so no doubt price has had a huge impact on that usage over the last number of years as well. Just finally, Shane, if I could ask a question coming through there about the farm there. Could K soil levels be an issue on Edwin's farm going forward while he relies on 18612? It's low in K for silage with only a small amount of slurry going out. Would 0730 be a better option?
Well, I suppose, Edwin, you're kind of focusing your P and K application early in the year, and on silage ground, you're obviously taking your first cut off that, so you have off-take off the ground. In relation to the grazing ground, you're grazing continuously and you're not over-applying too much P and K, like you're soil sampling regularly as well, so that would be a good way of monitoring it. I don't think it's an issue on this farm, Edwin.
We'll probably do another soil analysis, maybe not this year, but in spring 2023 or start 2024. So we'll see. Just keep an eye on it. I suppose that's all we can do.
I suppose maintaining it, then
I suppose I know, Mark, like Edwin is using a small bit of 0730 as well there on some ground that needs it. And for some farmers, like I suppose, like really 3 fertilisers would nearly do for most grassland farms. So you go 18612 to get your P out. You're getting the P in the 6th part. You go with your protected urea for your straight nitrogen, so you're getting your nitrogen out that way. And if you need to top up, then Mark, on some of the other paddocks with K, you have 50% muriate of potash, which would get out your K on those paddocks then that need an extra bit of K as well. So like ideally those 3 fertilisers, they're the cheapest form that you can put together of fertilisers, and they're the lowest emitting combination that we can come up with as well at the same time.
A lot of positive remarks coming in here about the work that's happening out on Edwin's farm and this Teagasc Signpost Programme. Just some more technical questions here. Question around experience that we have of using beans or other protein crops as a break crop to bring up the soil fertility. Is there any experience that we have on that?
Do you want to do that, Deirdre?
Yeah, limited enough, but having said that, beans and peas and so on, they're legumes, so they I suppose operate in a similar manner to clover in that they can fix nitrogen, and we know from research elsewhere that if you have legumes like beans and peas, the residues that are there afterwards increase your soil nitrogen certainly for the next crop. So I suppose they fit quite well in a tillage type scenario. Probably a little bit more challenging in a grassland system where you're not rotating in with a crop. But yes, like overall, they do fix nitrogen and they increase the residual nitrogen that's there, or the organic nitrogen that's in the soil that can be released through mineralisation for the subsequent crop.
Okay, very good. Seamus, some questions coming in about the treatment of slurry. There's various different options and products out on the market there. Do any of these products, have you seen any of them that hold ammonia and condition the soil, or do we have any research to support the claims that are being made with some of these products?
Yeah, I suppose there is research ongoing, Mark, with our colleagues in Johnson Castle at the minute to see can they reduce the greenhouse gas emissions and ammonia emissions. That's kind of early stage work at the minute. There's also some biological additives that some farmers use, and they seem to work that they make the slurry a bit more dilute. It's easier to agitate, definitely from some of those ones as well. But there is some work ongoing at the minute, Mark, with our colleagues in Johnson Castle, which will be coming on stream in the next year or 24 months.
Just in terms of the availability of some of the protected urea, I know there were some issues mentioned in the last 12 months. What's the situation like there at the moment?
Yeah, very much. Look, I suppose as part of the Signpost programme, we were very conscious pushing protected urea last year if it wasn't available. But like we have gone, we're at about 16% at the end of June, Mark, for all our straight nitrogens used as protected urea. We'll probably rattle about 20% this year. As well as that, between the ordinary urea, we're at about almost 30% of our straight nitrogens as well used. So we can start protecting our ordinary urea, and at our current rates of protected urea, we're nearly 50% of our straight nitrogen is protected urea then at that stage. But the availability, definitely this year, there was fertiliser brought in early in the year, and as the fertiliser was restocked by a lot of the merchants, Mark, there was a lot more protected urea coming in. So there was definitely a lot more availability, and we know from farmers they are looking for a lot more now at this stage. And definitely the question is coming back, Mark, I suppose, with protected urea is, it's how long does it last in the bag, and the dates that it's actually in the bag at this stage. So farmers are trusting the science, they're finding it works very well on farm, and they're moving on to the next one now is how far can they actually bring the product before it goes beyond the shelf life. And I suppose that's the other thing just to mention as well, protected urea, Mark, it kind of has 6 month kind of shelf life as such. So what happens after the 6 months is the inhibitor on the urea can actually maybe break down, and the product just works the very same as urea. So if someone has it over the winter and they're worried whether it's stored or not, just use that product as the first couple of rounds next year. It'll work the very same as ordinary urea, worse, as protected urea is best, and they will get to work to grow the grass that they need to grow.
But I suppose to get the value is really, I suppose it's important to get it spread within that window, really, because otherwise you're
absolutely,
spending
Mark,
extra on the protected urea.
And the big advantage of protected urea, you can use it any time throughout the year. So it works the very same as can, and it'll work at the shoulders of the year the very same as urea, but it's lower on ammonia and it's also lower on greenhouse gas emissions. That's the big win, the win-win for farmers.
And Edwin, you were saying to me earlier that you haven't noticed any difference really between the protected urea and your previous fertilisers that you were using. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct, Mark. I honestly can't say that I see any reduction in grass growth from changing to protected urea. So,
very good.
Okay.
And I suppose just on that, Mark. So Edwin, in fairness, is measuring grass and is on pasture base, and we monitored grass growth this year compared to last year, and I suppose using protected urea and reducing his nitrogen has seen no significant decrease in grass growing this year compared to 21. It's back about 0.8 of a tonne, but we're putting that down to drought, which I think is fair to say we can assume.
And we have a question here. What about grass growth and fodder production at Edwin's farm? Have grass growth levels maintained with the change of fertiliser application? I think you've more or less answered that question. I think that is something that you haven't seen a massive impact on. Let me have a look here. So we have just a question in relation to advice for farmers, Seamus, regarding fertiliser use for 2023. Any general recommendations there? Yeah,
great to get the opportunity, Mark. Look, any farmer is looking in what fertiliser for 2023. If you're looking for value of money, first of all, you go with 18-6-12 to get out your P's and K's. You go with protected urea to get out your nitrogen, and if you need a little extra K in to top up after that, muriate of potash. And the beauty is those combinations.
And are we talking about all farms or dairy specifically?
All farms, Mark, across the board. And like especially heavily stocked farms. Like we're seeing it with a lot of our Signpost farms. The €40 Shane mentioned there about changing fertiliser type, we're finding that €40 to €50 per cow saving across the board on a lot of our more heavily stocked Signpost farms. So it's a huge saving. Like on the average farm, switching fertiliser type alone is about €5,000. And I know, Edwin, when we did the calculation with yourself, I suppose unfortunately you don't get the 14,000 handed to you in a briefcase or anything. But like when we did the calculation yourself in the last couple of days, Edwin, you would feel that your fertiliser bill didn't go up as much maybe as you thought it was going to go up this year with the combination you used. Would that be fair to say?
Definitely, Shane, Seamus, definitely. At the start of the year, we were worried about big fertiliser bills coming in, but for me, with the changes we made there, we came in pleasantly under the target. So it was great. Yeah.
Great. We have a question, Deirdre, in relation to the incorporation of clover, maybe in an existing sward, and when is the best time to stitch in clover if you don't want to do a complete reseed, and what's the best method?
Really good question, Mark. The best time to stitch in is in April, so as early as you can in the year. And it works very well. Most of the time. There'll be the odd time it won't work, and you might have to go again, and that's okay. A little bit of perseverance or stubbornness, So the best way to put it in, if you can, is so to have good conditions. First, make sure your soil fertility is right. Make sure your sward is good perennial ryegrass sward. So why that's important is if you have an old butty sward, like an old permanent pasture, your clover seed is tiny. It's like the full stop on a page, Mark. You need to get the seed to touch the soil. So good perennial ryegrass, low weed content, good soil fertility, graze off really tight, like down to 3.5 centimetres if you can. Absolutely clean out that paddock, and then go in with, if you can, with some kind of a drill like a 9-bock or a guttler or something like that, so that you're getting that seed to soil contact. But really importantly then, after you've put it in, is how you manage the sward afterwards, because you'll get the seed to germinate, but you do have to do a little bit of work to get it to establish. So Edwin mentioned earlier, about looking after that ground for the rest of the year. So reduce your chemical nitrogen fertiliser, or cut it out if you can for 1 or 2 rounds, or for the rest of the year if that suits your system and you've enough grass growing elsewhere. So reduce that nitrogen just to give the clover the chance, to capture the light, because I suppose it's important to know that the grass will take up the chemical nitrogen faster than the clover. So what will happen is you'll get shading out of the clover.
Smothering.
Yeah. And then the other thing is, don't leave a heavy cover build up. So go back in, at around 1,000 kilos and graze it out tight. So it's all about getting light down to that little emerging clover plant to help it establish. So I suppose like what Edwin's doing is really good approach in terms of incorporating clover by reseeding or oversowing, is not doing the whole farm together. Now that's not practical anyway, but if you do big proportions of the farm with oversowing, for example, altogether, very difficult to push special management on a big area. Much easier to do that on a smaller area, 10-15% of the farm, because you do have to do that little bit of preferential grazing management, which is basically skip in and out of the rotation. So you might be going back to that every 16 days or so, instead of waiting your 20-21
So be prepared
days.
to jump in and out.
Yeah, and just keeping the cover low will really help that clover.
And to the point, Deirdre, when we're talking about reducing chemical nitrogen or cutting it out, it's important that we keep putting out the P and the K.
Absolutely.
So it's the whole fertiliser, Mark.
Yeah.
It's the nitrogen we're cutting, but we're keeping the P and K out there all the time.
And look, if you have dairy washing super, we see clover swards, even established ones, respond really well to that little bit of boost that comes from your dairy washings.
Yeah. Do I ask Edwin a question there? Because I suppose a lot of grass mixes, Edwin, have maybe 0.5 kilo to 1 kilo per acre in them. I suppose the recommendation would be to go to 2 kilos of clover per acre. Like, what kind of rates of clover do you incorporate in your scenario?
I just think, Seamus, we put out 1 kilo now. I'd have to check that, but I don't think we went with a 2 kilo rate now. We just went with 1 kilo.
And you got a good take even with the kilo?
I got a great take, yeah. Particularly last year, I got a seriously good take, yeah. This year doesn't look quite as good, but it's early days yet. It's only been grazed maybe four times,
But you were saying, Edwin, this year that paddock behind us is reseeded, and you noticed that the clover really performed well this year, even in the drought.
Yeah, the clover certainly this year was such a dry year, and it certainly seemed to perform better than the paddocks that had no clover getting nitrogen. The clover paddocks, we call them the clover paddocks, seemed to be growing much better in a particularly when the drought got severe. I noticed the clover was sort of getting me out of trouble a lot of the time when I came back to graze them.
Excellent point, yes. We have a question here about some farmers being afraid that clover might take over some paddocks. Is this an issue, or have Deirdre or Shane or Edwin, have you come across any that is an issue?
Not really, realistically, Mark. So Seamus showed in his presentation I suppose the growth curve or the contribution to the sward of clover across the year. So, this time of year you're going to have high clover contents in your sward. So 50, I've heard of even 60% in the last few weeks. But like across the year, you're still only going to have about 20% average. For most farmers, the issue will be actually getting and maintaining that 20% average rather than clover taking over. And I suppose, look, a rule of thumb, if it looks like there's 100% clover in the paddock, it's probably about 50%.
Half it.
Yeah. Remember, the clover plant is different. The leaves are more upright, they're bigger, they take up a big area than the grass. The grass grows up more, so you will see it being more dominant. But, realistically, Mark, that's not a major concern. And, I suppose one little bit of advice, if there are paddocks that you think have a lot of clover in them right now, maybe graze them a bit later in the last rotation.
Okay.
Yeah, so you're taking off that cover.
And getting the light down next spring as well.
So you're giving the ryegrass loads of opportunity for tillering. So it's just a little bit of playing around with the management. A lot of clover, graze it later in the last rotation.
Okay, thank you very much for that. We're coming to the close of our session now. I just want to say a big thank you to Edwin in particular for an early start this morning. I know you had in preparation for this morning's link, but thank you so much for allowing us onto your farm. And Shane, also thanks for your help in organising this interview. To our panel here in studio, Seamus Kearney and Deirdre Hennessey, thank you so much for your participation. We're now going to hear how you can be the winner of €250 if you tune in. Stay tuned in to us now for a moment.
Teagasc are delighted to announce the Signpost Photo Competition. Don't delay. Capture photos of the action you are taking on your farm to reduce emissions and submit them to the Signpost programme to be in with a chance to win €250. Some of the relevant actions include liming, applying P&K to tillage crops, dosing and vaccinating, weighing animals, milk recording, extending the grazing season, checking your Board BF farmer feedback report, checking your NMP for lime or K needed, and soil sampling. The closing date is the 14th of November. To apply, go to www.teagasc.ie/signpost. Don't delay, enter today.
Okay, now we're going to go back to County Tipperary, where we're joined by Dr Siobhan Kavanagh, who is Communications and Engagement Specialist with the Signpost Programme team. Siobhan, you have an action-packed week for us next week as part of Sustainability Week. Can you tell us more about what's happening during the week?
Okay, good morning, Mark. So the theme for Signpost Sustainability Week is Farming for a Better Future. And we all know that there is an urgency on the adoption of a lot of the technologies that are available to us right now to reduce our emissions in particular. So the focus for the week is on identifying those simple actions that farmers can take over the next 12 months to help improve sustainability on their farm. So the main themes are around reducing greenhouse gases, enhancing biodiversity, improving water quality and soil health. So we will have key messages coming out in each of those areas through the week. And what we want farmers to do is to identify a couple of simple actions that they can adopt on their farm over the next short while. In terms of events then, so we have a series of in-person and online events through the week. So our in-person events are 4 farm walks. There's one in Washford, Limerick, Galway and Offaly. And we would be encouraging farmers to attend those events to see what the Signpost farmers are doing to improve the sustainability on their farm across those major areas, but also to maintain profitability and output. In terms of the online events, there's 2 events of significance in particular next week. One is the launch of the National Farm Survey Sustainability Report, which will happen on Monday afternoon, and there's a webinar on that. And then on Friday, the Signpost demonstration farm sustainability results will be issued as well. So it's the first year for us to issue sustainability results for these farmers, and it's setting out the baseline year for those. So aside from that then, there's 2 other things happening. We're launching a sustainable fertiliser training programme that's available for rural professionals, and I suppose that is one of our key starting points, is to reduce our emissions from nitrogen. So that's a really important course, and that's in conjunction with Teagasc Connect Ed and ICOS. And then Declan has just mentioned there the photo competition that we're also running next week.
Great. And where can people find out more about what's happening next week?
Okay, well, the website, we have a page dedicated to it on our own Teagasc website, and that's at www.teagasc.ie/signpost, and there's a specific page in there that all the details for all the events and the activities and the messaging that we'll do throughout the week. And then obviously keep an eye on our social media pages, on Teagasc Daily, and then in the local media we'll have articles and that in the local papers, and also there'll be some local radio interviews as well. So keep an eye on all the channels that we will put out information to our clients and to the rural professionals also.
That's great, Siobhan. Thank you so much, and it sounds like there's something there for everybody next week.
Absolutely. Thanks, Mark.
And that's all we have time for today. My thanks to our speakers and our entire production team. Next week we'll be joined by Professor Frank O'Mara, Director of Teagasc, and Dr Tom O'Dwyer, who's Head of the Signpost Programme, and they'll be talking about launching the new Signpost Sustainability reports. So from all the team, we want to say have a good weekend, and thanks for watching.